Inspecting your half-base respirator. You want to inspect your respirator when you're first issued the respirator, after each use, and before each use or shift for the day. And then if you happen to share a respirator, you want to inspect it before you use it again. So there's a few main components of the respirator. They include the harness, which consists of all of these parts, the face mask and the sealing surface area, the inhalation valve and another inhalation valve, and then the exhalation valve, as can be seen here. So the first thing you want to do is inspect the outside of the mask to make sure that there's no cuts, holes, tears, burns, or other chemical damage to the respirator. Next thing we want to do is look at the sealing surface area and make sure that it's not deformed. Sometimes these will be set down and equipment will be put on them and they'll actually stretch out. So you want to make sure that they are not deformed and that the sealing area is not damaged in any way. Next thing we want to do is make sure that those inhalation valves are present and that they are working properly. Here you can see the inhalation valves, and there should be two, one on each side. These inhalation valves prevent you from exhaling air back out through the cartridge or filter. So the filter and the cartridge go here, screw on here on both sides, and they prevent you from breathing out. Your warm, moist air can damage the filter and shorten the life of it, and so that's why those valves are important. The other valve you want to inspect is the exhalation valve. This is the valve that prevents you from breathing in toxic or unpurified or unfiltered air into the respirator. And so it's very important that this one is in place and that it's functioning properly. And so you want to make sure it's pliable and flexible. That's why they make it orange, so you can actually visibly look into the respirator to ensure it's there. The next part that we want to look at is the head strap and harness assembly. What we're checking for here is any cuts or tears to any of the components, and then making sure that there's still elasticity in the headband area. These, once you get them set to the position that you like them in, you can leave the top portion alone. And then the back portion, you want to check to make sure that the buckles for the neck that goes around the neck, you want to make sure that the buckle works. And then this is where you would make your adjustments when you put it on. So that is the inspection of the half-base respirator. The next component that we're going to look at is the P100 filter. The P100 filter comes in a couple different configurations, this one being one of the smaller versions of the P100. Sometimes they're stacked or have another cartridge, chemical cartridge, attached to them. This one though is strictly just a P100 filter with no chemical protection. This is designed, it has multiple layers of wrapped filtration paper, as you can see up in this area, that are just folded to add a bunch of surface area to filter out any kind of contaminants. It's all folded in here, and it'll give you protection against particulate matter. In the case that we're worried about right now, viruses, and so it'll be add an extra layer of protection for anybody wearing these versus like an N95. A P100 filters out over 99% of contaminants. An N95 filters out at least 95% of the contaminants. So this is actually a better filtration system than the N95 mask. Plus the fit that you get with a half-base respirator like this one, a tight-fitting half-base respirator, is better than what you would get with, say, like a surgical mask. There's not a lot of components to inspect on the P100 filters. They do have a threaded area that's located here that you This is where you thread them on to the side of the respirator. And you have to operate this respirator with a filter on both sides. You cannot operate them with just one on, or else you'll be breathing dirty air. Beyond that, there really is not much else you need to do with this filter until it's time to change it. For the type of activity that you're going to be using these filters for, your contamination area is going to be right in here, which is where the air is being drawn into the filters, into the filter area. And so this location is where you're going to have that air moving through and touching the components on the exterior of the filter. The rest of the components really aren't going to be heavily contaminated unless you actually had some direct exposure to the sides of them. So that's the P100 filter installed, ready to be used. To change this out, there's a little varying guidance on when that should happen. For these types of filters, usually the rule of thumb is that we change them out whenever we start to feel restriction of air coming into them, so when it's difficult for us to breathe air in, or if we were to smell or taste any kind of material breaking through. In the case of viruses, you're not going to taste or smell it. And so we're relying on the restriction to help us understand when we need to change these out. There's varying guidance. Do some research. Look out there and see what you can find. The guidance that we found on CDC's website talked about 40 hours of use before needing to be changed out. But once again, that's dependent upon a number of different items, to include how often they're being worn, what kind of contamination they're seeing, if it's dust or is it just strictly you're filtering out any kind of a virus. And then the last piece of it is any exposures that it may have had to humidity, water, disinfectant fluids. All of that can help make these filters actually plug off sooner. So P100 filter.
Donning of the half-face respirator. One of the first steps you want to take when you're donning the half-face respirator is make sure that your hands and face are clean. It's important that your hands are clean because as you're putting it on, you could be touching the inside of the respirator where your face is going to be and where you're going to be breathing. So clean hands are very important. When you utilize your respirator, make sure that you're keeping it in a clean environment. So for example, we use Ziploc bags to store our respirators in. Next thing you want to do is make sure that it's clean. If it wasn't clean the last time you used it, go ahead and use an alcohol wipe or equivalent to clean it off. Start with the inside of the respirator first and clean that section where your face is going to go. This is a good practice to take to make sure that your respirator is clean and ready to go when you're using it. The next step that you're going to take is putting on the filters. In this case, Dawn is demonstrating the P100 filter. It's a filter that's only used for particulate matters, as we've discussed earlier in this video. So you go ahead and screw them on. You have to use a filter on both inhalation valves or inhalation sides. You can't use just one because it will not function properly. You want to remove your hat when you get ready to put this on. And first thing you do is you want to slip the respirator up to your face, put it where you think it should go, and then flip your head covering or your head harness up over and place it around your head where it's in a comfortable spot. After that, tighten your nose straps or cheek straps, and then you want to place the neck strap around and secure it behind your neck. The North respirators actually have a device where you can pull the straps from the attachment point back towards the forward and towards your face to actually tighten it down, as Dawn's demonstrating. Once the respirator's where it feels comfortable and you get it adjusted properly, you want to do an exhalation test and an inhalation test. Just like you would on an SCBA mask, you're testing to make sure that you have a proper fit. Now the respirator is properly donned. The next step is doffing of the half-face respirator. First begin having your proper PPE on to protect yourself because the respirator could be contaminated. Once you remove the respirator, you want to make sure that you clean it off because it could be contaminated on the exterior of the respirator. Plus, it's a good idea to wipe the interior to just make sure that it stays clean. So as you can see by Don, he's demonstrating using an alcohol wipe to wipe the inside of the respirator first, just to clean it out. Make sure that it's clean before the next time you have to use it. Once he finishes cleaning up the inside of the respirator, then he's going to wipe down the exterior of the respirator. This is not a full disinfectant type of a wipe. This is just a get the grime and whatever contaminants could be on there off quickly. Once you are done with the respirator, wiping the respirator down, then you can wipe the filters down. Remembering that the outside where you breathe through, where the air passes through, is going to be your highest contaminated area. After you've given it a good wipe, you can go ahead and place the respirator back in a clean environment out of direct sunlight. And then remove your PPE. And always the last thing we want to do, just like on any medical call, is clean our hands, our face, make sure we do a good decon of our body after we've been on a call or have been wearing this personal protective equipment. That's it for the doffing procedures.
Once you've worn it and have used it for the day or the shift or the call, the next thing you want to do is clean it and disinfect it. So for a casual use throughout the day to disinfect it, one of the best things you can use is just an alcohol wipe to brush it off and clean it. You don't want to get the contamination that's on the outside of the respirator into the inside of the respirator, and so you need to be cautious on how you hold it and how you clean it. The most contaminated area on these respirators, these half-face respirators, are going to be this location on the filtration system because that's where the majority of the air is drawn in. But you could have contamination anywhere on the exterior of this respirator. And so as you go to clean the respirator, you just want to start wiping it off and cleaning the surfaces that could be contaminated on the front of it. So wipe off these surfaces. And what we're trying to do right now is just take off any kind of large chunks, obvious contamination areas. We want to wipe them down and get that off of us. If you notice, I'm holding the respirator from the outside. I'm not sticking my hands up into the ceiling area or where my face is going to be. So I'm wiping it off. And getting these areas clean. The most contaminated areas, once again, are going to be on the face of this filter. And so that's going to be the first or the last place I wipe before I remove these. Because this is where the bulk of the contamination could be. Now for an alcohol wipe to kill any kind of microorganisms, we need to let that sit until it actually dries completely off. And then once it's dry, now we can begin disassembling it. So remember, my gloves could still be contaminated, so I'm not reaching in. So these filters, we can actually keep these filters and reuse them multiple times. And so if that's going to be the case, then we can leave them on the respirator. Just make sure we're doing a good wipe down and proceed on. But if we want to do a more thorough cleaning, we can put the respirators off to the side and then use another alcohol wipe and just continue with the cleaning process. And this time we can actually break down the respirator even more and get to those surfaces that are hard to reach, that are underneath the strap, underneath the filters, and really get a good cleaning job done on this. So I'm getting all those spots that are hard to reach and get to. The one part that's going to be the most difficult is going to be the straps, the actual cloth straps, the the elastic pieces on the straps. And that one you can wipe. You're just going to have a difficult time getting any kind of contaminants out of that without actually disinfecting it, washing it down, and disinfecting it. Once we've wiped it down, we can go ahead and reassemble. Now, as long as it's going to be our face on this respirator, we don't have to worry about cleaning the inside, unless for some reason we believe that we got some kind of contamination in there. And if you fold over the outside, you can actually get these to push in and lock in without actually sticking your finger in there. And so you don't even have to touch on the inside. So the inside is contaminated with our breath and it's been exposed to us. But beyond that, it should be clean on the inside. So we could go ahead and wear this again and not have any exposure. If we think we got contamination on the inside of the mask, or if somebody else has worn it, then what I recommend, highly recommend, is actually going through a decontamination or disinfectant process with the respirator, which we'll see in the next video. You can use alcohol wipes or respirator wipes to clean it out, but the best protection you're going to get is actually soaking the whole respirator in a disinfectant solution and letting it sit there and disinfect the whole respirator, removing the chunks, removing all the contamination, the chemicals, neutralizing the chemicals that may be on it, and then it'll be ready for use again. But that's how you field decon your respirator after use.
There will be situations where you need to do a good cleaning and disinfection on your respirator. Some instances could be a call where you know that the respiratory protection has been directly contaminated, or in situations where you may be assigned a new mask that has been worn by somebody else, your mask is going to be worn by somebody else, or your mask hasn't been cleaned or disinfected for a number of days. So first thing you want to do is remove the filters, as you saw in the video. And you want to follow the OSHA guidelines or the manufacturer's recommendation for the proper decontamination of these respirators, similar to what we would use in our SCBA equipment. In this case, we're using a disinfectant powder that we mix with water. It has a proper mixing solution that you want to do. As you can see here, we're removing the internal valves, so the two inhalation valves, the head harness and suspension system, and the exhalation valve. We don't want to create any spots where any material could be trapped between two pieces of equipment. So we want to remove all that. Once the sink is filled, or the bucket or whatever piece of equipment you're using is filled to the proper volume for this disinfectant mixture that you've applied, you want to make sure that the equipment gets properly soaked and is properly covered by the disinfectant material, and then it sits for an adequate amount of time. For this disinfectant, they recommend a minimum of 2 minutes of soaking within the product to make sure that everything's disinfected properly. So as you're letting it soak, it's a good idea to mix it around occasionally and make sure that there aren't any air pockets or other spots within the equipment that's not being disinfected by the actual material or the water. Once it's sat for a bit, go ahead and scrub it out. You can use your gloves and just wipe down all the surfaces, or you could use a brush to clean the surfaces. If you utilize a brush or something similar, though, you want to make sure that it is clean and that you're not actually spreading any contaminants with it. And so typically we recommend just using your hands, wiping it down, making sure that it's clean, similar to what we would do for a proper hand washing. We want to make sure that we're not going to lose our inhalation or exhalation valves before we drain the material down. So you can see we pulled it out of the way. And now you want to give it a good rinse with clean water. And so make sure that you get all the material off of it, all the soap, that it's all clean before you can return to service. So one of the spots where the soap and disinfectant can sit is actually in the head suspension area, and so make sure that any of those cloth components, that you do a good job of flushing them out, getting them clean so that it doesn't hold any of this disinfectant. Some people can have allergic reactions to the disinfectant, so it's important that we get it all clean and get all the soap removed. After that, we want to hang the harness and let it air dry, or use a clean towel and wipe it out so that it's no longer wet. The preferred method is typically through just hanging it and letting it air or drip dry. Do not forget to put in your different valves. So we have 2 inhalation valves, as you can see, that are being placed right now, and the 1 exhalation valve, which is the orange one, which is visible from the outside. The respirator has to be put back together with those valves in place for proper function and operation. Once those are installed, we can install the head harness assembly, and then it's ready to be hung and stored for the next call or use.